Alrighty. Hey, no, yeah, for sure. How you doing? Oh shit, I forgot to do something. Hold on. Got the wrong scene up. Hey, Tierno. There we go. There's the right scene. I almost feel like I should have a background. Hey, scrambled eggs. The legend has arrived. Very good. Oh my god, Bigfoot just followed. Very, very cool. Oh shit, I got no yeah for sure is raiding with some people. That's terrific. That's fantastic. Thank you, Ghost. I appreciate that. Hey, Harrison Tuttle. Who's from No Yeah for Sure's stream? Let me know. I'd like to give you a shout out individually. Thank you, Pharaoh Minette. Ghost Coalition. Hell yeah. I keep meaning to get a gun, not a real gun, a like a fake gun, a Nerf gun. Oh shit! Hey Ryan, thank you so much. I forgot I gotta do the dance for somebody subscribe. Hey Blue Jay, welcome, welcome. For 3 months in advance. God damn. Hey Vichane, how you doing? Harrison Tuttle just followed the channel. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Oh yeah, Nerf's super fun. I used to play a lot of Nerf with some of my friends back in college, but I need to be able to bring a gun up, but it not be a real gun because I don't want to get in trouble with Twitch. I mean, I have plenty of those, but I just don't want to be flashing them around. They say you can show a gun on Twitch as long as you're not pointing it at anybody or being threatening, right? But I don't know if I believe them. I'm a small enough channel that they could fuck with me, and I'd just be SOL. Like, oh, yeah, he's gone. Goodbye, Comrade Gomer. Oh shit! Thank you, Blue Jay. I appreciate that. Shit, thank you, buddy. um, Tierno, you was in the raid, but don't shout you out. Okay, I will never say anything about you again. How about that? Actually, I do want to give a shout out to Tierno for their cool videos that they've been making on Twitch. It's a lot of fun. Like watching that. It's fun to see on Twitter. I like when all my friends make Twitch videos. If any of y'all are Twitch content creators, let me know because I like to watch it. And I love to see more communist shit on Twitch. Or not on Twitch, on TikTok. I meant to say TikTok. Um, wow, there you go. Yes, TikTok. Thank you. Hey, Socialist, welcome. Hey, Viking Demon, welcome. Viking Demon, you said something very interesting earlier on Twitter when you said you was talking about um hey bearded cynic, how are you, my friend? I'm good. I'm good, thank you. Viking, you said Puerto Rico no necesariamente va a decolonizar después de la independencia, right? Something like that. Anyway, I was like, damn, that's a very interesting point, and I gotta say, like, uh, I've thought about that a lot myself. Hey, Lucas, welcome. Um, you're doing another show tomorrow at 6 p.m. Sad Boy Saturday. Okay, yeah. I'll try to make it. I get alerts. I do get alerts. I'm usually out and about when my friends are streaming, so I don't always show up. But yeah, I'll try to pop by. Hey, Jamie, welcome. ¿Cree que es verdad? Yeah, yo también. Por parte del capitalismo, ¿sabe? So, let's see. Heard about my stream on Shitty Christians. Right on. Hey, Fried Oysters, welcome. Yeah. Uh, I like those two. Shitty Christians was a fun podcast to be on. Um, Scrambled eggs. I speak several languages very shittily, including Spanish. Thank you, Elpers Goonga. I appreciate that. Yeah, the people on Shitty Christians, they did a very interesting. I mean, they do some interesting work on their podcast, but yeah, the guy was real fun to talk to, and really got to the hardest questions, and it just felt like talking in somebody's living room, very calm, very relaxed. So yeah, I recommend the Shitty Christians podcast to anybody. Feel free to drop the at or whatever. if you'd like in the chat. Oh, right on, Friday. This is very cool. Hey, Darth Aztec, welcome. No sabia, Jamie. Or should I say Jaime? Polythought. Oh my god. If you keep coming up with new terms that I'm gonna have to admit, I'm gonna have this long ass list of like almost curse words that y'all like to put into chat. Hi, I never know how to say your name. ICUIM, Ikum, Ikum. Welcome, bud. Welcome. See, yeah, we're almost all here. The gang's almost all here. I don't know if Grimm's coming or not. Coom, Ikum. Y'all tricking me into saying bad stuff. I said no. Oh, it's Lucy. Of course, Lucy. What's a Gomer? Well, Gomer Pyle is an old character from an old TV show, and then in Full Metal Jacket, Gomer Pyle was he was the one who was like in trouble. You know, the one who is like the sergeant was like the drill sergeant was like, yeah, I didn't know you stack shit that high. Okay, cold Turk. We got the first band of the night. Good night. And it's funny because your message didn't even come through, you idiot. There we go. Yes, historical and dialectical materialism tonight. Thank you, Lucy. Hey, Kush Dog, welcome. Appreciate that. Wow, didn't know I had to add that term, hail H word, to my blocked list. I figured that should already be on the damn blocked list, but here we all are. Oh shit, Cold Turk followed the channel. Thank you so much, Cold Turk. I appreciate that. Yoicks, indeed. All right, so tonight we are reading from Dialectical and Historical Materialism. Zoink, Scoop. By Joseph Stalin. Even if you don't like Stalin, which a lot of people don't, that's fine. This has got a lot of good information in it. All right, it's the fundamental thought process, the fundamental way of looking at the world of all Marxists. Right. So this is vitally important to understand as a Marxist. Right. Who is Jim Nabors? Hey, T. Griff, by the way. I'll have to look up Jim Nabors. Oh shit! Thank you, Blue Jay. Shit, boy. Thank you. Lenin didn't like him either. I mean, that's something. There's something to be said for that. But the point is, Stalin the leader versus Stalin the writer are almost like two different people. All right. So this is a very thoughtful and concise and clear. Right on, Tigre. It's a very thoughtful, concise, and clear way of talking about dialectical materialism. It's not the end-all, be-all about dialectical materialism, but yeah, it is. It definitely has a good starting place, and it's very simply written, and so people like me who are ding-dongs can understand it very easily. And it's a very short book. I mean, like, look how thick this is. Not very thick at all, right? It's like 50 pages. That's it. So that's why I'm reading it on stream, right? I can just read through the whole motherfucker on stream. Although, y'all know I have been thinking about doing something. Now, my streams are not, like, I like doing 2 streams a week. I've been thinking about adding a third one. Before, I had a third stream that was the Bad Takes at Brunch. Hey, Incel Annihilator, welcome. I haven't seen you forever. Welcome. Also, hello, Exquisitor Vorbis. Welcome to the show. Always happy to have you here. So yeah, I've been thinking about doing a third stream, and instead of doing Bad Takes from Brunch, which was fun, but ultimately I can only dunk on Liv so much. Like, there's so much to dunk on, but also I think Celine was kind of busy. So I've been thinking about doing a third stream a week, like a morning stream on the weekends before my partner wakes up. And it would be reading, exactly. I've been thinking I would just like read through some texts, just read them out loud, and do like some long streams just reading, right? Dunking on Libs could be a short segment, yeah. And and it would just be like Tierno. It would be like I wouldn't. I would probably be explaining some in the chat, but it would be less like a normal show and more like just calmly reading. You know what I mean? I don't know if like sometimes I think maybe somebody else should do it because y'all can't see my mouth, and so like I think especially for if there was any foreign people who wanted to listen in, it might be better to watch somebody read who you could see their mouth. But you know what? It's okay, right? Like I think Dunking on lives is a lifestyle. You think that'd be good, Sosa Guitar, if I just had like Saturday mornings I just like literally just read through a book. You know what I mean? Like one of the classic books that I talk about a lot. I could read through it and I could like kind of give little asides every now and again if I read something that's a little bit difficult, right? So yeah, I mean it's been fun doing that with my buddy T and Spittin, on Mondays and Fridays or Saturdays. He has the group where he does that, but yeah, um, Darth Aztec. I always do PowerPoints. The only reason I'm not doing PowerPoints today is because we're reading through this book. But usually, I almost always do PowerPoints. But yeah, a study with the house row. Oh, that'd be fun. That would be very fun. I might do that, Exquisitive Orbis. I really might. Just have like a very relaxed stream, like have my robe and pipe, you know what I mean? And then my mask still on. That'd be funny as shit. Maybe I'd have a towel on my head, like I just got out of the shower or something. Anyway, okay, it's like 15 minutes in. I got to actually start reading. Okay, so enough bullshitting. Let me get to the good stuff here, the important stuff, which is dialectical and historical materialism. So we are starting section 3, historical materialism. So let me just get started. It now remains to elucidate the following question. What, from the viewpoint of historical materialism, is meant by the conditions of material life of society, which in the final analysis determine the physiognomy of society, its ideas, views, and political institutions. So like, how is society set up, and how do material conditions, like the way things are, like money, like just the way your life is, like how does that affect society? All right, kind of interesting. What, after all, are these conditions of material life of society, and what are their distinguishing features? There can be no doubt that the concept conditions of material life of society includes, first of all, the nature which surrounds society, right? So actual nature, geography, which is one of the indispensable and constant conditions of material life of society, and which, of course, influences the development of society. Now, this is interesting. We as Americans don't think about this very much, but geography absolutely has had a big role to play in all of history, right? When we talk about like the Soviet army pushing back the German army in World War II, we always talk about like Russian winter. We talk about things like them trying to cross the Urals and failing, right? There's all these things that are like it's very much nature and geography oriented that drove a big historical moment. When you talk about things like the Long March, it was marching for a very long way over some over a lot of terrain at a very fast pace, which is what makes it so interesting. And when you talk about like the way that we started out on one side of the U.S. and then we're ever pushing westward, and the times, the different places along the way that the Native Americans were able to make better stands, the places where they were able to push back, the places where the way that the Native Americans were fought differently. Like all that shit matters, right? We don't think about it a lot today because we have airplanes. We get all of our stuff by boat, and so it's like the world seems a lot smaller. But one thing that is very important to talk about here is that when you're in a war, right? When there's an actual, hey, Dad's Wax, welcome. When there's an actual war going on, all of this shit, it becomes important again, right? And so when libs are, I mean, even when, people who do not consider themselves libs, but when libs are talking about how, oh, we could never stand up against the might of the US military, oh, they have tanks and planes and all we have is, toy drones and handguns. We could never stand up against them, right? That is lib shit because it ignores the geography of the land. It totally ignores the geography of the land. Hey, Onur Bey, you can curse in Russian if you want. Just don't say anything in English. So yeah. Nope, gotta follow Tahir Biat. Thank you very much. Tari Bat. Sorry. Dad's Wax, we're doing the second part of dialectical and historical materialism. Oh, yeah. Just a timeout. There we go. So when all of these things come back, whenever you're actually in a war type scenario, the geography actually matters. And because the United States is so spread out, right? Because the United States has these long portions of land with not very much in between them between the cities, geography matters. So, and geography will drive the way that guerrilla tactics are used in a future, American Civil War. So, so much of what we look at in no, this is not a no swearing zone. Say anything you want. Just don't be putting random swears in the chat. You know what I mean? If you just saying fuck in the chat, I don't need to see that. Nobody needs to see that. Be cool. Be good. Okay, and they just follow my channel, so let's see if they come back with something nice to say. You know what they say, if you can't say nothing nice, then get the fuck off my channel. So yeah. There can be no doubt that the concept conditions of material life of society includes, first of all, the nature of the sound. Oh yeah, we already read that part. Historical materialism answers this question in negative. Geographical environment is unquestionably one of the constant and indispensable conditions of development of society, and of course influences the development of society, accelerates or slows its development. But its influence is not the determining influence, inasmuch as the change and development of society proceed at an incomparably faster rate than the changes and developments of geographical environment. In the space of 3,000 years, 3 different social systems have been successfully superseded in Europe. The primitive communal system, the slave system, and the feudal system. Yeah, exactly. All of y'all are saying good stuff. Dad's Wax, yes, exactly. The urban gorilla is going to fight differently than the jungle gorilla in a different country. Exquisitor Vorbis, yes, exactly. Rural, like when you're in corn country, you're going to be fighting in a different way than the urban gorilla will have to. Takes 4 more courage. I don't know what that means. My hat is on backwards. You got the same. What do you mean the hat is on backwards? Why would you put this in the back? That don't even make no sense. Anyway. In the eastern part of Europe and the USSR, even 4 social systems have been superseded. Yet during this period, geographical conditions in Europe have either not changed at all, or have changed so slightly that geography takes no note of them, and that is quite natural. Changes in geographical environment of any importance require millions of years, whereas a few hundred or a couple thousand years are enough for even very important changes in the system of human society. It follows from this that geographical environment cannot be the chief cause, a determining cause of social development. For that which remains almost unchanged in the course of tens of thousands of years cannot be the chief cause of development for that which undergoes fundamental changes in the course of a few hundred years. Okay. Okay, that's funny. That's funny, FX Terror. That's funny. All right. So what he's saying here is an interesting point, which is that certainly things like geography matter, and they're something that people don't think about. But because it doesn't change much, it can't be the principal thing that causes change in the rest of society. What causes change has to be something that moves faster, has to be something that changes faster, right? So what he's trying to get us to look at here is look at all the conditions, but when you're trying to figure out the primary condition, you have to look at something with speed. You have to look at something that is constantly changing and that is affecting things rapidly. So when you absolutely, and so people can invade Switzerland by land thanks to the Alps, tactical advantage. Right, exactly. But does that drive society in the Alps? It affects society in the Alps, but it's not the principal thing that drives it. So we as Marxists have to look at the small things, the things that affect it, such as geography, but we have to look at the large things, and we'll get to what the chief dominant forces are in just a second here. So further, there can be no doubt that the concept of conditions of material life of society also includes growth of population, density of population, for people are an essential element of the conditions of material life of society, right? Living in the city versus living in the country makes a big difference in your material conditions, right? And without a definite minimum number of people, there can be no material life of society, right? On a desert island, there's no society. Is growth of population the chief force that determines the character of the social system of man? No. Historical materialism answers this question too in the negative. Of course, growth of population does influence the development of society, does facilitate or slow the development of society, but it can't be the chief force of the development of society, and its influence on the development of society can't be the determining influence because, by itself, growth of population does not furnish the clue to the question why a given social system is replaced precisely by such and such a new system and not by another, why the primitive communal system is succeeded precisely by the slave system by the feudal system by the bourgeois system, and not by some other. So this is very interesting. Fair enough, bearded cynic. This is a very interesting idea. What he's saying here is that yes, population changes, population growth absolutely does matter, right? Living in a city versus living in the country, having a densely populated area versus a sparsely populated one. These things will change the society of the area, but it's not the principal thing, right? So he's hitting these things that are important, right? All of these things that do matter when you're trying to consider what determines the way the material conditions of a place are formed. But what he's trying to say is this one's important, but it ain't number one. This one's important, but it ain't number one. And he continues here with why population growth isn't number one. If growth of population were the determining force of social development, then a higher density of population would be bound to give rise to a correspondingly higher type of social system. But we do not find this to be the case. The density of population in China is 4 times as great as in the USA, yet the USA stands higher than China in the scale of social development. For in China, a semi-feudal system still prevails. This was written a long time ago. Whereas the USA has long ago reached the highest stage of development of capitalism. The density of population in Belgium is 19 times greater than the USA, and 26 times greater than the USSR. Yet the USA stands higher than Belgium in the scale of social development. And for the USSR, Belgium lags a whole historical epoch behind this country. For in Belgium, the capitalist system prevails, whereas in the USSR has already done away with its capitalism and has set up a socialist system. Well, that was nice at the time. It's gone now. But yeah, what he's trying to say here is you can look at different countries and you can talk about how they're more or less densely populated, but obviously you can have a densely populated country that is extremely poor and suffering, like modern day Bangladesh would be a good one, most densely populated country on earth, right? And then you look at a place like he says, like Belgium, it's also fairly densely populated, but they're quite different in their level of development. So there's got to be something else. So So the force that is the chief determining force is the method of procuring the means of life necessary for human existence. The mode of production of material values, food, clothing, footwear, houses, fuel, instruments of production, which are indispensable for the life and development of society. Okay, now hear me out here. Hey Joy Mason, how you doing? This is written by a Russian in Russia. I mean, well, technically by a Georgian in Russia, but they didn't have all of the same issues that we have today or that we historically have had in the United States, right? So when we look at the principal chief determinant forces that change our material conditions, it may be different for the colonized person, okay? So the colonized person may actually have a different set of chief determinant forces than the method of procuring the means of life, because it will be driven by, because that will be driven by something else, okay? And namely colonization. So for us, we can definitely say that more than population density, more than geography, the means of production, specifically for the means that people are kept alive, food, clothing, houses, fuel, instruments of production, factories, all that, land, right? Indispensable for the life and development of society. So in order to live, people have to have food, clothing, all that stuff, right? People have to produce them. And in order to produce them, people have to have the instruments of production, and they have to be able to produce the instruments as well, right? So you have to have factories for building parts for building new factories. So the instruments of production wherewith material values are produced, the people who operate the instruments of production and carry on the production of material values thanks to a certain production experience and labor skill, all these elements jointly constitute the productive forces of society. Now, let us take a look at race here for a second. So, when you have different people in a society who are assigned to different types of production and who are allotted different ways of sustaining themselves, as in, like, some people are allotted a very low, meager way of sustaining themselves, and other people are invited simply by the color of their skin to potentially join the petty bourgeoisie, to not necessarily have an automatic access to the petty bourgeoisie, right? But to have a much easier climb up, then things like that also matter, right? Because it affects the person side of the instruments of production, right? The productive forces are not just tools. So often people, when they think about modes, like the modes of production, the instruments of production, right, they think about things alone. But labor power and the way that labor is set up, right, as well as the way policing is set up, the way that the military is set up, right, the people side of that is absolutely important as well. So you cannot just think of factories as these empty buildings that are full of machines and the machines do the shit, right? The people side also matters. And when there are different classes of people kept in different parts of that society, then that affects the way that things are produced, all right? Now in America especially, we have a economy that is based on the highest stage of imperialism, which is partially war, but more than war. War is simply the tool for opening up foreign markets, opening up foreign labor markets, opening up foreign buying markets, and opening up foreign financial markets. All right. So there are, there are a lot of ways to make money in this world, but the way that imperialists make money when they are a fully developed imperialist country is through banking, right? Is through going to other countries, lending them money, and yes, as you say, Tierno, parasitically taking that money out of that country, right? So they take the goods, they take the raw materials, absolutely. And Lenin does talk about this as far as like they take raw materials and manufacture it in their own home country. But eventually, countries will get to a point that they don't focus so much on manufacturing. They literally just focus on finance. So yeah. So why is that important? Why did I go off on this big thing about finance, right? It's important because different types of people in the society, different races, a lot of times will have different different access to these financial institutions and will play different roles in these financial institutions. When many white people have their savings tied up in stocks and such, right? Um, they are part of the financial institution in many ways. So, yeah, exactly, Dad's Wax. That's a good point too. The debt of Latin America to Britain was basically transferred to the U.S. That's deep shit, right? And there are many countries that buy each other's debt, right? So there's some high level stuff going on that we don't even know about, right? And if you ever go on Wikipedia and you look at the products of a country, right? Then what you'll see a lot of times is they'll have natural resources, they'll have manufacturing, but they'll have services, right? They'll sometimes call it financial services, sometimes they'll just call it the services sector, right? But a lot of times what that means is simply instruments of debt, moving money around. And a lot of times the only way that this money is moved around and is kept the way that it is through the military, right? So just like you can't go up to your boss and say, give me a raise or I'll punch you, right? You can't do that, and the reason is because of the cops. These countries can't say, we're not going to pay this bill anymore. We're not going to take part in your predatory lending practices anymore. We're nationalizing our businesses, right? Because every time they do that, every time a country tries to get financial independence from the debt structures that the imperialist countries set up, they get swept the fuck away, right? The governments get taken over. There's a CIA coup, exactly. Yeah, and so exactly. Um, so what you have to know is that yeah, exactly, Dad's Wax, exactly. So what you have to know is that these kind of things matter not just on a governmental scale, but on a person-to-person scale as well, right? So we are in this weird position in the United States where through things like stocks, regular people can kind of be part of the owner class. And as you get older, you kind of join the owner class, but the owner class is also constantly trying to push you down, proletarianize you, right? So the financial forces within the country are trying to take away that money from the petty bourgeoisie, as historically people have tried to join the petty bourgeoisie through being part of that stock market, right? So there's a lot of weirdness going on here, but we can definitely say that it is not, what we can all agree on is that it's not just our country. It has to do with other countries overseas as well, that we're all part of this ecosystem of enslavement and exploitation, but also that it's not just like the factories or whatever, that there is, and that the way that production happens in the United States, the way that jobs are set up, certain jobs are for certain races a lot of times, and they get commensurate higher or lower pay, things like that, right? The way that these things are set up, the way that the human side of the productive forces are set up is racist, right? Is sexist. Certainly you could say it's bigoted in many other ways, right? But yeah, the it's just more than factories. So I went on this long tangent to say that the most. It's just more than factories. So, and I think he might be going on to say this a little bit more. The productive forces are only one aspect of production, only one aspect of the mode of production, an aspect that expresses the relation of men to the objects and forces of nature which they make use of for the production of material values. Another aspect of production, another aspect of the mode of production, is the relation of men to each other in the process of production. So literally what I was just talking about. The relations of production. Men carry on a struggle against nature and utilize nature for the production of material values, not in isolation from each other, not as separate individuals, but in common, in groups and societies. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, in Barley Hop's talking about that. Homes, cars, and things like TVs and couches that you can buy on credit, right? Credit cards. Those are instruments for keeping the poor poor and helping the rich get through hard times. It's the same instrument that helps the rich stay rich and make sure that the poor never become petty bourgeoisie, right? Because the interest rates are different for the people who are already rich versus the people who are already poor. So when you have a predatory interest rate of 12%, or more if you have credit card issues, and so you have the exorbitant credit card interest rates of 26, 30%, whatever, right? Then yeah, you are going to stay poor because you cannot get out of that debt cycle. Whereas rich people, because they have access to these better debt ratios, they can actually make money just by borrowing money due to inflation sometimes. So yeah, it is a totally unfair system that is rigged against the poor. There is no doubt. So in production, Marx says, men not only act on nature but also on one another. They produce only by cooperating in a certain way and mutually exchanging their activities. In order to produce, they enter into definite connections and relations with one another, and only within these social connections and relations does their action on nature, does production take place. Consequently, production, the mode of production, embraces both the productive forces of society and men's relation of production, and is thus the embodiment of their unity in the process of production of material values. All right. So this is wildness. This is very interesting because even though he's not specifically spelling out how race plays a part in this relationship to the relations of production, clearly in America, when we do even the most basic analysis of the material conditions, the historical and current dialectical material conditions of the United States, we can see that race has and continues to play a huge part in it, right? And we can see also that it is not just something of the past that has changed and then has gotten better, but rather we can say that as early as, I mean, as recent as like 2009, we saw black wealth decimated by banking practices, right? We can say that black people have the worst outcomes. We can say that Latinas are the backbone of American agriculture and represent and wildly overrepresent as far as like the race of America, like their racial numbers in America versus the number of people working in agriculture, right? So a lot of the tasks that keep society going, but that are paid the least, that relegate people to the lumpen proletariat, are racially driven. So yeah, redlining might be illegal, but the effects remain. Exactly. And I would say that redlining is not actually illegal. They just find new ways of doing it that are not so overt. Those dumbasses in the 30s may have taken red markers and actually drawn out the red lines on the maps, but nowadays they don't need to do that, right? They just need to look at things like credit scores. Credit scores are fundamentally racist things. There is no point to a credit score besides racism, all right? So yes, certainly there are plenty of poor white people who get caught up in bad shit with credit scores as well. There's no doubt about that. But I am saying that things like prison and credit scores specifically and purposefully are mechanisms for keeping down certain white people, but a whole lot of minorities as well, right? The point in many ways is to make it look like there's nothing going on. There's no legalized racism going on, but actually to have it in full effect, to have it more, in fact, to have it more effective than it was in the past. Straight up. Yeah, exactly, Mason, good boy. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And people never, I mean, people talk about this quite regularly, but I just want to hit home. Between 2005 and 2009, median net worth of black households dropped by 53%, right? That, like, that should appall everyone. That should, like, we should look at that number and be sick to our stomachs. You know what I mean? Like, because it's clear racism, right? It's like there's no other term for it than that we have racism in the highest ranks of our government, of business, right? And because business and the government are the same thing, we can say the oligarchs, right? We can say that it is the wrongness that we talk about. And we have things like settler colonialism going on today, right? In places like Hawaii, certainly in Puerto Rico, but especially in places like Hawaii and Alaska, where they're actively trying to kill Native Americans and push them off their land, right? So, like, we're living in what we oftentimes consider the past, right? When we've always taught when we were all libs, I think most of us were libs at one point. We would oftentimes think about this like racialized violence, this racialized economic subjugation as, a part of slavery and then Jim Crow, but then it's kind of like, people are trying to get on their foot. But no, like we have the greatest loss of black wealth of all time in, the last decade, a little bit more than the last decade, straight up. So we have to understand the nature, like the point of this book, the point of me going over this book, but certainly the point of this book is to start looking at these contradictions, to start looking at things as they are. And when we say we have had the greatest loss of black wealth of all time, only 15 years ago, that's very recent. So we can say absolutely that race is still one of, if not the, principal contradictions in the United States, right? So I go over all that because of all the Marxists that you see online who will try to say class is the thing that matters, class drives all of this, right? Well, it wasn't that 50% of all people across the United States lost their wealth. It was 50% of a very specific group of people, right? So when things are like that, then we can know that the oligarchs at least are trying to structure society such that race is the principal contradiction for them, right? And if it's the principal contradiction for them, and they're the ones who run the country, then it has to be the principal contradiction for us as well. So, does that mean that we ignore class? Does that mean that we say that, okay, so anything that's ever happened to a white person doesn't matter because it happened to a white person? Of course not. That's wildness. That's absolute wildness, okay? We can say that the suffering that white people have felt is real and matters. But we can also say that it is a reason for them to look to help their countrymen, right, who are being subjugated even more than they are, right? To say, I've felt this pain, I've felt this suffering, I've had this money taken away, and I look at your group, like I as a white person look at your group, and I see that pain doubled, tripled. I see you being treated in a way that I already find abhorrent, but to the second and third times of it, right? I see your family being thrown on the street when my family's just finding food a little bit difficult to get, right? When you start looking at things like that, then what we need is solidarity from white people for the other races of the country, right? We don't need to be saying like we need to focus on class. We need to be saying we are here for you. We are here because to help you is to help ourselves. Because to solve the greatest problem will keep us from falling into the trap of only solving a few problems. And that's why I have gone, 4 years ago as a Bernie bro to a confused socialist to a communist now, is because I've seen, I've seen the contradiction. I've seen the way that things are in the United States, and I know that there ain't no fixing this. There ain't no coming back from where we are right now with the law, because the law is evil, evil, evil. All right, and it's there to hurt people. It's there to hurt people and make some people think that it's all going to be okay. Right? To keep some people feeling like justice is being served. To keep some people feeling like the liberal ideals are alive, while actively suppressing and killing other people. So, yeah, we can't fuck with that. Yeah, y'all are spitting good stuff in the chat. Thanks so much. Thank you so much to the. Yeah, exactly, Exquisitive Orbis, exactly. It's wildness, right? So, continuing on. Thank you for letting me get on my soapbox for a little while. Oh, Lord. Oh, beans. There we go. The first feature of production is that it never stays at one point for a long time and is always in a state of change and development, and that furthermore, changes in the mode of production inevitably call forth changes in the whole social system, social ideas, political views, and political institutions. They call forth a reconstruction of the whole social and political order. At different stages of development, people make use of different modes of production, or to put it more crudely, lead different manners of life. In the primitive commune, there is one mode of production. Under slavery, there is another mode of production. Under feudalism, a third mode of production, and so on. Correspondingly, men's social systems, the spiritual life of men, their views and political institutions also vary. One thing we can think about, one thing that I think is very interesting, is to think about how things like the internet have changed so much, right? The internet has changed like the way that we think about everything because it's changed the way that we work. It's changed the way that we interact with each other, right? And it's changed the fabric of the nation, right? So, um, so when we think about the changing modes of production, computers and the internet absolutely have to have to be a part of that. Thank you, Ghost. I appreciate that. See y'all tomorrow. Um, so, whatever is the mode of production of a society, such in the main is the society itself, its ideas and theories, its political views and institution. Or to put it more crudely, whatever is man's manner of life, such is his manner of thought. This means that the history of development of society is above all the history of development of production, the history of the modes of production which succeed each other in the course of centuries, the history of the development of productive forces and of people's relations of production. Hence, the history of social development is at the same time the history of the producers of material values themselves, the history of the laboring masses, who are the chief force in the process of production and who carry on the production of material values necessary for the existence of society. Hence, if historical science is to be a real science, it can no longer reduce the history of social development to the actions of kings and generals, to the actions of conquerors and subjugators of states, but must above all devote itself to the history of the producers of material values, the history of the laboring masses, the history of peoples. Yes, this is interesting. So, the American Revolution was a white landowners' revolution, yeah, but it also had a big part of the American Revolution and the French Revolution afterwards was the change in factories, right? The fact that a lot of home craft type stuff was going away, and there were both agricultural tools that were being made to make things easier. There were factory ways of doing things. Not quite production lines, but ways of doing things in a more production line type fashion than the at-home kind of way of doing things from before, the personal craftsmanship of the past that had changed things. And with that change, with the advent of factories and such, you got a new wealthy class that controlled things and was able to buy land, right? This wealthy class that controlled things and bought land eventually got more and more political power and developed this liberal state, right? So you no longer had a king. You had landowners for the first time in a way that they didn't need permission from a king. They needed permission from a state. And as they got richer, as the modes of production, the factories and such, and the people working in the factories got more densely populated, working more closely together, right? Then they became more efficient. They were able to extract more from people's labor, and they were able to make more goods at a better quality than ever before, and therefore to get really rich, right? Because as they rapidly got rich, they were able to buy land up and actually challenge the kings, which is what happened in the American Revolution. Now, when you look at things like the Civil War, what you're looking at is, of course, they talk about slavery. Of course, they talk about these grand ideals. But one of the most important things in the Civil War was, the invention of the cotton gin. It was a technological revolution in the way that cotton was produced. But that's not the only thing. there was also like the steam revolution was actively going on in factories, right? And so the factories of the North were producing, and they needed the raw materials of the South. So they were doing this thing where the labor value of the slaves was decreasing and decreasing due to things like these new technologies that were being used, but also the demand for raw materials was increasing. So you had you had a fundamental contradiction between the landowners and the factory producers in the North. So, uh, thanks, Jamie. So, yeah, absolutely socialist. It had a big influence on the educational system, no doubt. They wanted to create better factory workers, and that's why you see the advent of so many things. Like, yeah, we had like colleges like hundreds of years ago formed, but you see this big sprouting up of so many institutions of higher education, right? People starting to go to high school and stuff like that. So, um, so yeah, it's very important. Raspudridge followed. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Um, so when we're looking at all this, did you notice that I didn't say one time Lincoln? I didn't say one time George Washington. I didn't say one time fucking King George III or whoever the fuck was in office, right? Henry VIII, I don't remember. Um, what it shows is that these big social changes drove changes in law, drove changes in the way people interacted with each other, right? To the point of like getting rid of the system of slavery. It changed things so much, right? Um, so no, you didn't. You ruined it. Whoops! I mentioned Abraham Lincoln. Oh fuck! Oh beans. So yeah. So we can talk about history without talking about great men. One very important thing to remember is that we can talk about recent history without talking about great men, right? We can talk about things like World War II and we can talk about like, production line mechanization that happened, like we talked about Henry Ford, right? This new way of doing factories that is electric, that relies on extreme division of labor, right? And then also imperialism, where these new forms of debt management and debt instruments are introduced into the world that cause these big political shifts in the world, right? You don't have to look at like what fucking happened to Duke Ferdinand or whatever. What you can look at is how these changes in the way things are made, these changes in the way people are living, is actually driving the politics of the time. And I think that's fascinating, right? Because if we do that in America, suddenly we don't have to look at fuckers like Trump. We don't have to look at people like Biden, right? We don't have to worry about that shit because there are bigger things to worry about. The bigger things to worry about are, for example, the race relations, right? And the race relations do not change depending on who's in the White House. And when we look at things like coronavirus and how coronavirus has decimated production, how coronavirus has totally shut down the economy, has made it to where people can't live, and to where there's a huge contradiction where landowners versus factory workers versus the government are all having a fight that they've never had before, right? Because the landowners, just like the landlords, just want to get paid, right? The factory people just want everyone to go back to work. And the government is trying really hard to keep this, like in a lot of ways, the government's job is to keep this shit from happening, right? The government really needs people to stay home because the government, its purpose a lot of times is to put the brakes on capitalist whenever capitalists are really going hard and making it to where people can't live, the government should be pumping the brakes on that, right? So in the case of the coronavirus, what we have is this very, very strange thing where, the government did a bad job with coronavirus. But what you see in the contradiction is some people getting pushed by big business to get people back to work. You see the regular people trying to push to get rent canceled, to get money so that they can just stay home, so they can get better, so that we don't have the pandemic continuing, right? And then you have the whole race issue breaking out at the same time, where we have many things coming to a head with the police state. And so when you have this economic terror as well as the race issue already on people's minds, right? Then we're in a powder keg. We're in a extremely rapidly changing situation, and the contradictions are coming to a head. So that's why when I talk about how it's important to talk to your friends about communism now, it's because shit might change really quickly in our country. And communist revolutions always happen as a direct result of fascists trying to take over, right? When the fascists try to get power, when they get more and more powerful, a lot of times that's when communists start coming up. So we're probably not going to have something happen in this country where we have like an invasion from Canada, right? Our fascist uprising is probably going to happen from within, and because of the racial contradiction that we have in this country, it's probably going to be white supremacist. So the principal contradictions in our country is likely going to bring to a head communism from the marginalized groups in this country versus white fascism. So straight up. And Tierno, you can say that you are not a fascist. You can say that maybe people of your race are a fascist, right? But there are a number of white people who are going to be trying as hard as we possibly can to fight back against the fascists, right? So just because the principal contradiction involves, is the United States, I got you. Well, just because the principal contradiction involves certain groups doesn't necessarily translate to every member of every member of that group is part of that same contradiction, right? But the pressures are there. This is something that's very important. When you talk about material conditions, what oftentimes you're talking about is this is the path of least resistance. If everything happens and someone doesn't really try to either work against it or have some kind of life experience that pushes them in a different direction, this is the path that the average person is going to take. And yeah, when we talk about white folks, we can absolutely say that there are certain paths that your average white person is going to take, and due to socialization, due to the place in the hierarchy where they have the different opportunities opened up for them, both with the police in the form of not getting arrested for dumb shit, but also in jobs and such, and in historical wealth, right? We can't forget about intergenerational wealth. So yeah, we can definitely say that unless there is some kind of experience in someone's life, unless they have something happen to them to make them care about others, unless they suffer themselves, or unless they, books absolutely can be part of it. So we can say that the what's the word I'm looking for? The propaganda is not going to change someone in and of itself. Propaganda is not magical, but propaganda can put a seed in somebody. Theory can absolutely put a seed in somebody, and then all you need is a little bit of experience. You don't need to have this whole world of experience to overcome all the previous propaganda. If you have the right theory, if you have the right information in place, then someone can see it and say and know on a fundamental level, this is the truth, right? So just got a follow from CP Champ. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, so continuing. The second feature of production is that it changes, and development always begins with changes and development of the productive forces. And in the first place, with changes and development of the instruments of production. Productive forces are therefore the most mobile and revolutionary element of production. First, the productive forces of society change and develop, and then, depending on these changes and in conformity with them, men's relations of production, their economic relations, change. This, however, does not mean that the relations of productions do not influence the development of the productive forces, and that the latter are not dependent on the former. Okay, so that's a whole lot of words right there. So, what he's saying is the way things are made, and also the way people interact with each other will affect each other, right? So, for example, talking about the distribution of labor in the United States, where a lot of races are relegated to work that is not paid very well, right? That kind of shit absolutely has an effect on the way that work is done. So from the high levels, if you look even back to the 1930s, right? They divided who got things like pensions and who got things like government support, unemployment, and such based on race, right? So people who worked in jobs like maids, or people who worked in jobs outside a lot of times would not get these kind of things like pension and unemployment. But people who worked other jobs that generally were not any different as far as the importance of to the livelihood or to the life of a city, right? They would get those things, and it was based on race, right? So when we say that race absolutely has something to do with the modes of production and the way that people interact with each other, right? We are not saying anything different than what he's saying right here. Hey, Farquad, thank you. So, while their development is dependent on the development of the productive forces, the relations of production in their turn react upon the development of productive forces, accelerating or slowing it. In this connection, it should be noted that the relations of production cannot for too long a time lag behind and be in a state of contradiction to the growth of productive forces, right? So if technology changes, everything is going to change around it, including society, fairly quickly. Inasmuch as the productive forces can develop in full measure only when the relations of production corresponds to the character, the state of productive forces, and allow the full scope of their development. It's not saying anything different. Therefore, however much the I just read that. I don't really read philosophy. No, I read leftist literature, but it's a whole lot simpler than philosophy. So otherwise, we would have a fundamental violation of the unity of the productive forces and the relations of production within a system of production, a disruption of production as a whole, crisis of production, a destruction of productive forces. Okay, and that happens sometimes, right? That absolutely happens. So when, for example, the Soviet Union tries to go backwards and tries to integrate full capitalism into a society that had already progressed to socialism, what you saw is immediate destruction. You saw people going hungry. You saw wealth concentrated into the hands of only a handful of people. Like all of a sudden, overnight, within 1 year, the majority of the wealth had been funneled into not just the 1%, but into the hands of only a couple dozen people in the Russian Federation. So we can absolutely say that when productive forces have gone higher, and then they are reduced back to a former level when you go to socialism, but then you return to capitalism, that you will see a reduction in quality of life automatically, guaranteed. And you do. An instance in which the relations of production do not correspond to the character of the productive forces, conflict with them, is the economic crises in capitalist countries. This gets interesting. Where private capitalist ownership of the means of production is in glaring incongruity with the social character of the process of production, with the character of the productive forces. This results in economic crises, which leads to the destruction of productive forces. Further, this incongruity itself constitutes the economic basis of social revolution, the purpose of which is to destroy the existing relations of production and to create new relations of production corresponding to the character of the productive forces. So this is Stalin's kind of getting into some deep stuff here, but it isn't that difficult to understand. In fact, he's saying more or less exactly what we talked about when we went over principles of communism, which is that because of the way that capitalism has these contradictions that it keeps from resolving, right? It keeps the poor from attacking the rich. It keeps these businesses who have this inefficient way of doing things from collapsing, right? So what you always have is every few years, every 7 to 10 years, you have this resetting of capitalism. You have everything crash and fail. The country should go bankrupt and get hurt. But what we have is the capitalists just push down, just punch the lowest members of society, throw a whole bunch of people in jail, steal a whole bunch of money, and then reset the economy. And if they can't do it at home, they do it abroad. We see this happen again and again and again, right? Right on, Incel Annihilator, and y'all, my my anarchist comrades, I would like to talk more about deeper anarchist theory sometime. Honestly, like I know we've been focusing kind of exclusively for a little while on communist texts, but I'm interested in reading like a more anarchist view on the economy and on the productive forces. Perhaps y'all could recommend some books. Anything besides Bread Book. I have Bread Book. I find it to be extremely boring. So something besides Bread Book I would love to read. In contrast, an instance in which the relations of production completely correspond to the character of the productive forces is the socialist national economy of the USSR. So Stalin's kind of yanking his own, you know what I mean? Where the social ownership of the means of production fully corresponds to the social character of the process of production, and where, because of this, economic crises and the destruction of productive forces are unknown. This is not true. All right. So actually, they did have economic crises in the USSR, and I would say that a big part of these economic crises that they had was due to the fact that they did not take care of these fundamental issues that Lenin talked about, in the teens, in 1917, such as maintaining democracy at the lowest level, having leaders be chosen from the bottom and going up, rather than having leaders being chosen from the top and going down. Things like keeping the workers armed, things like watching out for graft. So when you have corruption in the government, it trickles down everywhere. It brings in the eventual collapse of your society, right? The reason why the United States is able to continue on, even though it has so much corruption in the government, is because of the military and the police, right? So we have the police to go around and throw all these people out of their homes and for the banks to repossess the homes. We have the military to go overseas and forcibly open other markets, right? So that's how we have capitalism able to continue on, right? So in the USSR, they couldn't do those things. They couldn't have an imperialist war. They couldn't have people go through the streets and just steal people's houses, just steal people's money, like they have like happens in the United States, right? Hey, Barley Hops, thank you for following. I appreciate that. So, yeah, obviously that's not sustainable. Exactly, Elijah. Right. So the USSR fundamentally was trying to do something sustainable and non-imperialist. So what happened? Well, when they had all this corruption and they had these issues, and they didn't have this pressure relief valve of imperialist wars, it fucking collapsed, right? There were a lot of different reasons why the USSR collapsed, but the fundamental pressure relief valve on the economy of the United States is imperialist wars, forcibly opening other economies, and also just straight up stealing money from the population, right? So yeah, how can we fix this? We can try to fix this the next time we have a socialist revolution by making sure that corruption is never a part of the government, by maintaining democracy, by having leaders chosen from the bottom up, by never allowing leaders to have what's it called whenever they get money to work for a company afterwards when they leave the government? Lobbyists, right? By eliminating the position of lobbyist forever, right? Things like that. Yes, Elijah, the ability to recall at any time, absolutely. Barley Hops, does Russia have a better vaccine? I have no idea. As far as vaccines go, I know China has one. I know Cuba has one. I know that there's one in Europe. We have one. I don't know which one's better. I don't know which one's getting produced more of. So we'll see. But we can also, there's a lot of things that contributed to the fall of the USSR. Also, things like perestroika, I think, was a big contributor to the fall of the USSR. That is when they were kind of opening up the economy, but also changing the way that tax revenues worked. So they would try to nationalize a certain sector of the economy, or they would just eliminate it, but they wouldn't make up for the loss in tax that would come with that. And so they would all of a sudden have this huge gap in their tax structure with nothing to fill it. So of course, tax revenues plummeted, so the government ran out of money. That's another big problem. So continuing. While the state of the productive forces furnishes the answer to the question, with what instruments of production do men produce the material values they need, the state of relations of production furnishes the answer to another question. Who owns the means of production? The land, the forest, the waters, mineral resources, raw materials, the instruments themselves, right? Production premises, means of transportation, communication, right? Who commands the means of production, whether the whole of society or individual persons, groups, classes, which utilize them for the exploitation of other persons or groups or classes, right? So It's important too. Who are the owners? How many owners are there? Is it the state? Is it individuals, right? Here is a rough picture of the development of productive forces from ancient times to our day. The transition from crude stone tools to bow and arrow, and the accompanying transition from life of hunters to the domestication of animals and primitive pasturage. The transition from stone tools to metal tools, with a corresponding transition to tillage and agriculture. Further improvement in metal tools, the introduction of blacksmiths' bellows, the introduction of pottery with a corresponding development of handicrafts, the separation of handicrafts from agriculture, development of an independent handicraft industry, right? These are things that I went over a little bit ago when I was talking about how things changed from around the revolution, around the U.S. Revolution, the War of Independence, right? There were big changes just in like stuff like this, as simple as going from making stuff at home to making stuff in big buildings and sharing equipment was it was a very big change that drove the development of production forces, right? So he goes on and on with this, and it is interesting to think about. And I think when I did my mutual aid talk, I went much more into this. So if you look up on YouTube, if you want to hear more about this, go to the mutual aid talk. In conformity with the change and development of the productive forces of society in the course of history, men's relations of production, their economic relations, also changed and developed. Okay, the way people interacted, the way society was set up, changed with the productive forces, all right? There are 5 main types of relations of production are known to history: primitive communal, slave, feudal, capitalist, and socialist. The basis of the relations of production under the primitive communal system, this is going to get into what I talked about with mutual aid a little bit, so get ready for a recap. It's only a couple of pages worth of recap, all right? And it is worth talking about because we don't talk enough about how things changed between the primitive communal system, the slave system, and feudalism. Oftentimes we imagine this linear growth due to technology. It was not due to technology alone. It was also due to the way that things changed between the way people interacted with each other, who owned what, right? So the basis of the relations of production under the primitive communal system is the means of production are socially owned. This in the main corresponds to the character of the productive forces of that period. Stone tools and later the bow and arrow precluded the possibility of men individually combating the forces of nature and beasts of prey. In order to gather the fruits of the forest, to catch fish, to build some sort of habitation, men had to work in common if they did not want to die of starvation, right? So we had to work together in the old days in order just to survive. Labor in common led to the common ownership of the means of production. So because we all had to work together, we all owned stuff together. Hence, the conception of private ownership of the means of production did not yet exist, except for the personal ownership of certain implements of production, which were at the same time means of defense against beasts of prey. So this is kind of what we want to go back to one day, except instead of going back in a way that is totally backwards and just going back to monkey, right? What we want to do is we want to have the technology of today. We want to have a revolution in the way that things are produced such that we can own the means of production together again, right? Return to monkey. All right, barley hops. Y'all talking about shit that doesn't have nothing to do with what we're talking about here, so we're just going to have a little time out. There we go. So there was no exploitation and no classes. we do not fuck with eco-fascism around here. Hopefully giving a little time out is going to let them come back with a little bit of different way of thinking, huh? The basis of the relations of production under the slave system is that the slave owner owns the means of production. He also owns the worker in production, the slave, who he can sell, purchase, or kill. Such relations of production in the main correspond to the state of the productive forces of that period. Instead of stone tools, they now have metal tools at their command. Instead of primitive husbandry, right, like kind of fooling around, kind of making animals do their thing together, right? You actually have real husbandry, like you have down to a science. Yeah, I agree, Incel Annihilator. Hey, unassuming Kiwi, I didn't know you was here. Yep. Broken Heart, Ecofash, yep. So now they have till in the ground, handicrafts, division of labor between these branches of production. There appears the possibility of the exchange of products between individuals and societies, of the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few, the actual accumulation of the means of production in the hands of a minority, and the possibility of subjugation of the majority by a minority and the conversion of the majority into slaves. So we have seen several times things like having this slave system that he's talking about, but also talking about how sometimes you have slightly mixed economies, mixed modes of production, or you will have regional different modes of production, right? And then that's what happened in the United States. The big contradiction was between the North, which had progressed beyond the feudal system, and the South, which was still in the slave system. So it made a big difference. They were wildly different as far as modes of production go. So of course there was a huge conflict there. Now, racism, slavery was important, right? As in, like, we're not going to say that slavery was okay. We're not taking a cold-hearted view of this. But what we're saying is that there was more at play here than just the North was moral and the South was immoral, right? We can all agree on that. And just like someone in the chat said, right? Abraham Lincoln, like basically the same day as doing the Emancipation Proclamation, also signed something allowing for the genocide of Native Americans, right? So we can absolutely say that the leaders at the top were not any more moral, right? They were actively doing the settler colonial thing. But yeah, it looks like y'all are having an interesting conversation. So let me look. Yeah, she was kissed by fire. So happy to see anti-eco-fascist stuff here. Good. Yes, absolutely. You're right, Mason. People who talk about overpopulation never speak of themselves. You're goddamn right about that. Yes, scrambled eggs. We do produce enough food globally to feed 10 billion people. I mean, and also, like, we throw away so much food. You know what I mean? The inefficiency in our logistics system leaves so much to be desired. And what's funny is, as soon as, like, y'all think about this, as soon as we have socialism in the United States, when we can start thinking of things in terms of need alone and not thinking of things in terms of dollars, it will simplify our logistics system so much that we will not have the kind of waste that we have now. Sure, in the past, in the Soviet Union, they had tons of waste, right? And that's because they were depending on people to do their jobs, and they just didn't have a lot of motivation to do it a lot of times. But when you have computers to help solve this stuff for you, right? When you have computers to help plan your logistics, you're going to have yeah, thank you, Elijah. Exactly. When you have computers to plan your logistics, when you just know how many people exist in every town and you can plan the routes of the trucks, even if it's not perfectly efficient, when it's based on need, it's fine. You're fine. You aren't going to have starvation in the United States, straight up, right? Hey, Ginnigan, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, yeah, exactly, Mason. We had a rationing system in the U.S. during World War II. Like, we don't have to have bread lines. We don't have to have any kind of, like, we certainly don't have to have starvation, but we don't have to have anything like the kind of limitation of food that they had in the Soviet Union, where they only had a couple of kinds of food. In a new U.S. socialism, we can have this variety of food that we as Americans really are accustomed to, right? We can have lots of different vegetables, nuts, fruits, and stuff, right? Grain, corn. Yeah. Exactly, because Vorbis, a neural net could effectively plan the necessities. Yes, exactly. Because the thing is, we know what people need. We know, like, where the houses are. We know where the distribution hubs are, right? So when we seize the means of production in the United States, we're not only going to seize the farms, right? We're also going to seize the trucks, and we're going to seize the algorithms. We're going to seize the way in which these companies have planned their routes, and we're going to easily reprogram it so that it'll just be based, instead of on things like money, it'll be based on route efficiency and getting food to people where they need it. So we'll have, I mean, it'll be a totally different world. It'll just be a different world. Yeah, I agree. Fried oysters. People are starving right now. It is depressing. It's unbelievable that we have people starving in this. In the United States, the allegedly economically best off country on earth. Right? The wildness. Yeah, Elijah. Exactly. Hell yeah. That's it, y'all. Whatever what Elijah just said, y'all write that on your hearts. so. Um, So here we no longer find the common and free labor of all members of society in the production process. Here there prevails the forced labor of slaves who are exploited by the non-laboring slave owners. Here, therefore, there is no common ownership of the means of production or the fruits of production. It is replaced by private ownership. Here, the slave owner appears as the prime and principal property owner in the full sense of the term. Rich and poor, exploiters and exploited, people with full rights and people with no rights, and a fierce class struggle between them. Such is the picture of the slave system. The basis of the relations of production under the feudal system is that the feudal lord owns the means of production and does not fully own the worker in production, the serf. The feudal lord can no longer kill, but whom he can buy and sell. Alongside the feudal ownership, there exists individual ownership by the peasant and the handicraftsman of his implements of production in his private enterprise based on his personal labor. Such relations of production in the main correspond to the state of the productive forces of that period. Further improvements in the smelting and working of iron, spread of iron plow and loom, further developments of agriculture, appearances of manufactories, and a lot of other things, right? So the laborers have to display some kind of initiative in production and an inclination for work, an interest in work. This gets interesting, right? In Minecraft. Yeah, exactly, y'all. Y'all know what's up. I am not trying to get kicked off of Twitch today, but I agree with everything y'all are talking about. The new productive forces demand that the laborer shall display some kind of initiative. I just said that. The feudal lord therefore discards the slave as a laborer who has no interest in work and is entirely without initiative and prefers to deal with the serf who has his own husbandry, implements of production, and a certain interest in work. Now, another thing, like this is a very simplistic view of it and very psychologically based, but Marx actually talked about it in a much clearer way before this. We're reading historical and dialectical materialism getting on. So when Marx talked about it, he said when you have a slave, you have to pay everything up front, right? So you have a system where the expenses are paid up front rather than on a daily basis. And as capitalism progresses, it has to have workers selling quantized value of time, just small amounts of time, a daily basis, and getting only the money for that time so that you can maximize the value that is pulled from them, right? And you can psychologically get them to work harder, there's no doubt, but also you can have them survive, you can have them procreate, you can have them thrive in a way that just isn't possible under the slavery system, right? So Marx says it's not just psychological, it's also like an economic thing that slaves actually are not great economically. So it's not just a thing where it's like it's wrong to have slaves, so we don't have slaves. It's actually like the capitalists looked at they looked at the way things were going. They looked at the economy. They looked at the numbers of things, and they said, actually, slaves don't make as much sense for manufactories. So let's get rid of that, and it'll make people happy. And also, we can further put the thumb on the agricultural section of the South. And so it was not a moral decision nearly as much as it was a financial decision to get rid of slavery. So here, private ownership is further developed. Exploitation is nearly as severe as it was under slavery. It's only slightly mitigated. A class struggle between exploiters and exploited is the principal feature of the feudal system. The basis of the relations of production under the capitalist system is that the capitalist owns the means of production, but not the workers in production, the wage laborers who the capitalist can neither kill nor sell because they are personally free. Hey, Barley House, welcome. Just remember, no eco-fascism in the chat. Thank you so much. Tierno, that's an interesting idea that slavery was abolished because it was too dangerous due to rebellion. Certainly rebellion was a thing that was happening that they don't talk about very much. But yeah, slave revolts were absolutely happening more and more. So You're a minor? Okay. Well, it's okay. It's good if you're a minor. So what I would say is just try to learn from some of the other people in the chat. And when you present ideas, present them as questions rather than statements, and it'll make you look less like you believe certain types of things that are, maybe things you need to think about more, right? So, I mean, Tyrno, I have read Settlers. I've read Settlers. And I'd be interested to maybe someday talk about Settlers with another, with a non-white comrade on the show. I think that there are things that I understood in Settlers, and there are things that I did not, that I need to think on a little bit more. So it's something. It's just something to think about. So the basis of the relations under a capitalist system, yeah, we talked about that. But who are deprived, the workers are deprived of means of production in order not to die of hunger, and are obliged to sell their labor power to the capitalist and bear the yoke of exploitation. Alongside the capitalist property and the means of production, we find at first on a wide scale private property of the peasants and handicraftsmen in the means of production. These peasants and handicraftsmen no longer being serfs, and in their private property being based on personal labor. In place of the handicraft workshops and manufactories, there appear these huge mills and factories equipped with machinery. In place of the estates tilled with primitive implements, you have these big-ass farms run on scientific lines and supplied with agricultural machinery. The new productive forces require that the workers in production shall be better educated and more intelligent than the downtrodden and ignorant serfs, that they be able to understand the machinery and operate it properly. Therefore, the capitalists prefer to deal with wage workers who are free from the bonds of serfdom and who are educated enough to be able properly to operate machinery. But having developed productive forces to a tremendous extent, capitalism has become enmeshed in contradictions which it is unable to solve. By producing larger and larger quantities of commodities and reducing their prices, capitalism intensifies competition, ruins the mass of small and medium private owners, right? That's what I talked about before, proletarianization, pushing down the people who have these small businesses into the working class and making them renters instead of owners, right? And then funneling that money back up to the rich. I mean, that's an interesting idea. I would not disagree with that, obviously. So, on the other hand, by expanding production and concentrating millions of workers in huge mills and factories, capitalism lends the process of production a social character and thus undermines its own foundation. Inasmuch as the social character of the process of production demands the social ownership of the means of production, yet the means of production remains private capitalist property, which is incompatible with the social character of the process of production. So that's very interesting. All right. What they're saying here is that when you have a bunch of workers working together, they rely on each other. They become more and more social in the way that they work, right? They depend on each other for work. And the more you get people dependent on each other, you're starting to return more to that early communist time way of looking at things, right? So yeah, that's very important to think about when you think about how the contradiction there is that you're making people be more social in some ways, while at the same time alienating them from their work, while at the same time not giving them ownership over anything, right? So these internal contradictions of capitalism are going to tear it apart. It's the reason why in all of the text that we've read so far, we say that capitalism will destroy itself, that it is inevitable that capitalism destroys itself. It's simply a matter of, does it destroy itself and become fascism, or does it destroy itself and become communism? Socialism or barbarism, right? That's the eternal question. These irreconcilable contradictions between the character of the productive forces and the relations of production make themselves felt in periodical crises of overproduction, when the capitalists, finding no effective demand for their goods owing to the ruin of the mass of the population which they themselves have brought about, are compelled to burn products, destroy manufactured goods, suspend production, and destroy productive forces at a time when millions of people are forced to suffer unemployment and starvation, not because there are not enough goods, but because there is an overproduction of goods. Isn't that exactly what we've seen with the housing market? Isn't that exactly what we've seen under coronavirus, right? We have all this shit, and it just goes rotting on the side of the road. I don't know if y'all saw them images of like trucks of onions rotting on the side of the road, right? So capitalism does this. It's unable to fix itself whenever there is a crisis. It has to violently right the ship. Milk was poured out during COVID in New York. There you go, exactly. Oh man, y'all are really getting into it in the chat here. Yeah, capitalists view people as expendable, and if you can't pay for something, then you go hungry. There are millions of vacant homes and tons of food that gets thrown out. There we go. We're talking about that right now. So yeah, y'all were just talking about how overpopulation is a myth. Yeah, exactly. We don't have an overpopulation problem in the United States. They don't have an overpopulation anywhere else. We have enough food. We have enough houses. We simply have a problem where capitalism is keeping people from getting what they need, right? And here's something to think about, right? Whenever they talk about supply and demand, they're always talking about supply and demand, right? Well, when you have a huge supply of things that are about to go bad, and you have a whole bunch of people who are hungry, shouldn't supply and demand mean that those things go down in price so that the people who are hungry can afford them, and you get a balanced price point immediately? Right? Shouldn't these forces work to right the crises naturally? The answer is they don't. They fucking don't. Straight up, right? So similarly with the houses, when you have hundreds of people in a small area of a city unhoused, but you have 1,000 homes, then shouldn't you have market forces balance out that the unhoused should be able to buy a home for a much reduced price? Well, no, you don't. That's not how it fucking works at all. So why does it not work that way? Well, the main reason it doesn't work that way is because supply and demand is a fucking myth, right? And it only applies to very specific market conditions, and it specifically only applies to price setting on a day-to-day basis, almost exclusively of commodity goods, and only in a sense when there is no crisis going on. Any other situation, if there's a crisis, when you're making something for the first time, when you're inputting labor into natural materials to manufacture something and then selling that product for the first time, none of that shit has anything to do with supply and demand. Straight up, right? Hell yeah. The kerosene and the oranges, yeah, big sandwich, exactly. They just burn shit up. I mean, Steinbeck was talking about this same shit, right? Yeah, they'd rather pay for missiles than happiness. Well, that's because they use the missiles to open up new markets, right? They use the missiles to continue capitalism, to find new places to take advantage of and to exploit. So they don't need our happiness to keep capitalism going, but they do need opening up new markets. So yeah, we can say that these contradictions exist, and so we don't have to say it makes no sense, right? I say that sometimes, but really what we have to say is it makes perfect sense to the capitalist, right? And the economic system that they say we have, the way that they describe the economy is a lie, right? We can say that makes no sense because it is totally false and doesn't describe anything accurately. But when we are able to describe it accurately, then we're fine. Everything makes sense, right? And that's why socialism, the Marxian view of the world, is the one that has given me the most peace in a lot of ways, because at least I know who the fuck my enemies are nowadays, right? Yeah. Study the fall of Rome that the U.S. thinks is fine, right? That's funny. So this means that the capitalist relations of production have ceased to correspond to the state of productive forces of society and have come into irreconcilable contradiction with them. This means that capitalism is pregnant with revolution, whose mission it is to replace the existing capitalist ownership of the means of production by socialist ownership. This means that the main feature of the capitalist system is a most acute class struggle between the exploiters and the exploited. The basis of the relations of production under the socialist system, which so far has been established only in the USSR. China had not had a revolution, Cuba had not had a revolution, Vietnam had not had a revolution when this book was written, right? Is the social ownership of the means of production. Here, there are no longer exploiters and exploited. The goods produced are distributed according to labor performed, on principle. He who does not work, neither shall he eat. Here, the mutual relations of people in the process of production are marked by comradely cooperation and the socialist mutual assistance of workers who are free from exploitation. Here, the relations of production fully correspond to the state of productive forces, for the social character of the process of production is reinforced by the social ownership of the means of production. All that's, there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? So, very interesting. Yeah. Y'all in the chat going off about the U.S. It is very interesting what he's talking about here, because what he's saying in many ways is true. Okay, so many people are deeply unhappy and have no friends. There's a alienation prevalent in the United States, right? We all recognize it. We all know what's going on. I mean, many of us feel it, right, on a daily basis. I feel lonely on a regular basis, and I'm a pretty friendly, fun guy, right? The alienation is real. But in the USSR, they were able to take off breaks. Like, they could literally take many factories had a thing where they could just take off in the middle of the day and go shopping, right? There was a kind of a little bit lackadaisical take on working in many places in the USSR. Now, when they were first building the USSR, it was not so bad. Not so bad, as in they were very hardworking toward building up socialism. So a lot of people even died in the building up of socialism, right, in the USSR. But with time, it got a lot more relaxed. And so there was a lot of graft, of course. There was a lot of issues, but there was a comradeliness, right? And I'm not making this shit up. This is in history books, all right? There was a comradeliness and there was a relaxation kind of view of work that was just different than what's in the US, right? When you are guaranteed a job, no matter what, then if you get fired, it's not that big of a deal, right? Shantron. I'm going to time you out for a bit because I don't like that bullshit you're saying. So yeah, when we have socialism, even if it is a little bit more inefficient because people are just not like working themselves to death, then it's still a lot better because a lot of these problems that we're talking about here are, just not so existent. A lot of the psychological problems that come from capitalism are deeply lessened. Am I a tanky? Well, you'll have to define a tanky, Dagda. You're Antifa? Very good. We're all Antifa in this chat. For this reason, socialist production in the USSR knows no periodical crisis of overproduction and their accompanying absurdities. Not exactly true. Because of the graft and because of the issues that happened, they did have periodic crises, but they were not country-ending periodic crises that ended up requiring imperialism in order to mess things up. What is this stream? This is a stream where I'm reading Dialectical and Historical Materialism and discussing it. So this is a stream where we talk about communist literature. Well, I'm glad you think so, Exquisitor Vorbis. You have a different definition of tanky than many other people. Some people say tanky is only the unreasonable ML. Some people say tanky is any ML that they don't like. So I'm just a communist. I believe in revolution. I don't think revolution is possible to do peacefully, but yeah. I have no beef with anarchists. I hope y'all have a revolution. So anyway, continuing. For this reason, the productive forces have developed at an accelerated pace. For the relations of production that correspond to them offer full scope for such development. such as the picture of the development of men's relations of production in the course of human history, such as the dependence of the development of the relations of the production on the development of the productive forces of society, and primarily on the development of the instruments of production, the dependence by virtue of which the changes in development of the productive forces sooner or later lead to corresponding changes in development of the relations of production. Okay, so he's just saying again that when you have new technology, and it's big new technology, it changes the way people relate to themselves when they are making things, and that in turn changes all of society, right? So, oh God, y'all going off about tankies in the chat. Oh boy. I got 3 or 4 pages left, and y'all want to talk about tankies. Okay, well, hold on a second. So if you say sympathetic to Stalin and Mao, what do you mean by sympathetic to Stalin and Mao, right? Do I read Stalin? I'm reading Stalin right now. Do I read Mao? Yes, I absolutely read Mao. Do I respect everything that either one of them did? No. Am I able to criticize them? Absolutely. Do I believe all of the CIA propaganda that's put out about them both and that gets repeated on a regular basis on sites like Reddit and Twitter? I do not, right? So why do I specifically say these things? Because it is really important, I think, if you have some definition of tanky, to understand that other people have a different definition of tanky, right? So maybe one guy in this chat, one person in this chat, thinks that having any sympathetic view of Stalin and Mao makes you a tanky. Maybe another person in this chat says only someone who has a dogmatic view of both history and theory, who is okay with things like herding anarchists or whatever, right? Only those people are tanky. But both of those people are using the same word, right? So I personally think that it is a shit word to use, because two people can be having a conversation and be meaning very different things when they use that word, all right? So I tend to agree with you, Tyrano, that the revolution is always authoritarian. But okay, I mean, and Kiwi, if you're saying that, where it's tankies are people who send the tanks into Hungary, if it's only them, then you could only be a tanky way back then, right, in the fucking 60s or whatever. So no more tankies on Earth. But yeah, it's important, right? It's important that we speak the same language, and you can certainly say that Marxist-Leninists have some things in common with the way that they see the world. You can say communists have some things in common, right? You can say the anarchists have some things in common, right? But you cannot necessarily say that all people who are called tankies have some things in common, because different people have wildly different definitions, right? Kitchen sink defense just followed. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So, continuing. The use and fabrication of instruments of labor, says Marx, although existing in the germ among certain species of animals, is specifically characteristic of the human labor process, and Franklin, therefore, defines man as a tool-making animal. Relics of bygone instruments of labor possess the same importance for the investigation of extinct economical forms of society as do fossil bones for the determination of extinct species of animals. That's kind of fun to think about, right? I mean, that is archaeology fundamentally, but to consider it as just as a stream of growing technology in the way that the fossil record shows the evolution of animals, right? Kind of interesting. Yeah, agreed, Ginnigan. Anybody's a tanky if you've made them angry enough. They'll call you tanky. So, social relations are closely bound up with productive forces. In acquiring new productive forces, men change their mode of production. And in changing their mode of production and changing the way of earning their living, they change all social relations. The hand mill gives you society with the feudal lord, the steam mill society with the industrial capitalist. This is from Marx and Engels, right? So, he's just given a bunch of examples from Marx and Engels here. So continuing on, the third feature of production is that the rise of new productive forces and of the relations of production corresponding to them does not take place separately from the old system, after the disappearance of the old system, but within the old system. All right, so things change from within. It's not like there's this breaking line wherever things are one way, one dime, and then changing the rest. Right? Waiting for concerted skull biting the tanky. Oh my god. Oh boy. Anyway, it takes place not as a result of the deliberate conscious activity of man, but spontaneously, unconsciously, independently of the will of man. It takes place spontaneously and independently of the will of man for two reasons. First, because men are not free to choose one mode of production or another. Because as every new generation enters life, it finds productive forces and relations of production already existing as a result of work of former generations, owing to which it is obliged at first to accept and adapt itself to everything it finds ready-made in the sphere of production in order to be able to produce material values. Secondly, because when improving one instrument of production or another, one part of the productive forces or another, men do not realize, they don't stop and reflect on what social results these improvements will lead to, but only think of their everyday interests of trying to lighten their load of labor and secure some direct and tangible advantage for themselves. Okay, so what's he talking about here? Basically, he's saying that you can't choose a mode of production. We can't go back to monkey. Anarcho-primitivism doesn't work because the technology is already here. So unless you're going to have a super authoritarian state, you cannot, like as in controlling every aspect of every person's lives, you simply cannot go back to monkey, okay? But you can't even go back to feudalism, right? And that's very important too, because so often you will hear people say stuff that is more or less saying, oh, we just need to go back to guilds, right? And it's like, that's garbage, straight up. Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. That's exactly right. Yes. So once the technology has been produced, it will lead to the social changes that it led to in the past, right? And so we have to have ways of dealing with things as they are. We can't just go back to earlier times, straight up. And caps ain't hell bent on feudalism, and caps are the most confused motherfuckers on earth. Straight up, they are so confused. You, Tierno, you can do that. God help you if you do that. When gradually and gropingly certain members of primitive communal society passed from the use of stone tools to the use of iron tools, they of course did not know and did not stop to reflect what social results this innovation would lead to. They didn't understand or realize that the change to metal tools meant a revolution in production, that it would lead in the long term to a slave system. They simply wanted to lighten their labor and secure an immediate and tangible advantage. That's fascinating, right? And he goes into how it's the same for all the other systems as things have changed, right? Hold on, what's that? Did she was kissed by fire say something? Historians living like Victorian farmers, no fucking thanks. Yeah, I agree. It'd be terrible, boy. I do not want to go back to monkey. Absolutely. What is ANCAPs? That is anarcho-capitalists, aka fascists who are just confused about fascism. Yeah, I think living history villages are cool, but we ain't trying to do that as a culture, right? So this, however, does not mean that changes in the relations of production and the transition from old relations of production to new relations of production produces smoothly, without conflict, without upheavals. On the contrary, such a transition usually takes place by means of the revolutionary overthrow of the old relations of production and the establishment of new relations of production. Up to a certain period, the development of the productive forces and the changes in the realm of the relations of production proceed spontaneously, independently of the will of man. But that is so only up to a certain moment, until the new and developing productive forces have reached a proper state of maturity. After the new productive forces have matured, the existing relations of production and their upholders, the ruling class, become that insuperable obstacle which can only be removed by the conscious action of new classes, by the forcible acts of these classes, by revolution. So what that's saying is, Capitalism, we can talk about it in modern day, right? So capitalism keeps things in a kind of suspended animation type state, right? It tries to slow down the speeding up of the productive forces. The government oftentimes is trying to slow down industry because industries are constantly eating each other, and as a result, causing huge upheavals in the economy, and shit's just going bad. Alrighty, you can come back when you can be respectful. People, oh, bye again and gone. People come in here and say, "Why you should try to win me over and debate me," right? And it's like, sorry, no, you can come and listen and hang out and have fun with us, but I ain't trying to win you over or whatever, right? Uh, Experience turns you into a communist. Theory keeps you from becoming an opportunist, right? But yeah, ain't no way that I can win you over in a single conversation to socialism. It's not how things work. Hey Bilbo, we're just finishing up the dialectical and historical materialism. I'm very close to finishing actually. Um, Thank you, scrambled eggs. I do try. So here there stands out in bold relief the tremendous role of new social ideals, of new political institutions, of new political power, whose mission it is to abolish by force the old relations of productions. Out of conflict between the new productive forces and the old relations of productions, out of the new economic demands of society, there arise new social ideas to organize and mobilize the masses. The masses become welded in a new political army and create a new revolutionary power. Make use of it to abolish by force the old system of relations of production and to firmly establish the new system. The spontaneous process of development yields place to the conscious actions of men, peaceful development to violent upheaval, evolution to revolution. So things change with technology gradually, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, right? We'll have a dying away of old modes of production and a bringing up of new modes. But we get to a point, and this is what Stalin is saying here, we get to a point that really things like the way that we organize ourselves as human beings, the way that we organize ourselves politically begins to actually matter to the modes of production because of the way that the capitalists are keeping things in this suspended animation type state, not allowing contradictions to fix themselves. So yeah, long story short, eventually theory becomes important. Eventually, we have to actually start making propaganda that is the truth, right? Because the propaganda that is the lie is going to be used to keep things in this suspended animation, to keep these contradictions from resolving themselves, right? So, Tyranno says, theory gets you to learn past mistakes of people trying to do the same exact thing so you don't have to start from scratch and make the same mistakes when you actually want to do something about it. Correct. So, yeah, scrambled eggs, I agree. Totally agree. I'd be happy if people later on got more stuff, but the problem is we have this quarterly cycle of profits, right? So because the way that businesses are organized, to only look at things in terms of 1 quarter per year, that the future doesn't matter at all, right? That they don't care about things falling apart in 3 quarters as long as they can get money in 1 quarter, right? It causes a total, not in the way normal people live, because you don't live your job from quarter to quarter, right? We don't think about quarters in our regular jobs. The people at the top, the oligarchs, that's how they think, right? So, yeah, our civilization is on a crash course because regular people think in terms of their lives, and the people on top think in terms of 4 months, 3 months. So, yeah, exactly. You want nothing more to pay the way for people who come after you. That's the normal way of thinking. That makes you a human being, right? And the capitalists, the oligarchs, are in a totally different way of viewing the world. And that's the contradiction. The whole mass of people think like you do generally. They want their kids to have something. And the oligarchs have organized society so that the kids have less than the parents, right? And that's why revolution is necessary. That's why revolution is inevitable, according to Stalin, right? that these contradictions will eventually cause people as a whole to come together to rise up and overthrow the oligarchs. It can't happen any other way, right? Because the contradiction gets worse and worse every year. Every year it gets worse and worse. CIA. Yeah, exactly, Bilbo. So y'all let me know if the stream is totally cut. So there's one last paragraph. I'm going to read one final paragraph and then it'll be done, all right? Hopefully the stream is not totally out. Y'all let me know if it is. Y'all please tell me if the stream is still going or I'm not talking to myself, all right? It says I got plenty of kilobytes per second. Okay, good. Damn, y'all scared me. All right, here's a formulation of genius of the essence of historical materialism given by Marx in 1859 in his historic preface to the contribution of a critique of political economy. All right? So, in the social production of their life, men enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. Relations of production which correspond to a definite stage of development of their material productive forces. The sum total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which rises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. And y'all, I want you to think about something. Now, I understand that I'm breaking up like the most important paragraph of this shit, and I apologize for that, all right? If Biden was a communist, he'd get the CIA facial. Yeah, that's true. Okay. What's really important here, and this is something that I keep on trying to hit home to people, all right? When Stalin has been talking about the productive forces, he has been talking about the things, the technology, the tools, and he is talking about the way that people organize themselves in relation to that technology, tools, way of making things, way of distributing the labor, way of having society function. All right? So in America, people are always talking, especially Marxists, especially the class reductionist Marxists, will say things like the base is capitalism. That is not enough of a description of the base, okay? The true fundamental economic way of organizing has race involved as well, right? When certain people are shut out of certain parts of the means of production, right? Whenever you have a stratification of society in the different jobs people can have, whenever you have money concentrated into certain races' hands as well as certain classes' hands, right? Then that is part of the base. So when we talk about base and superstructure, right? Racism is not a cultural thing. Racism is a fundamental part of the way that people relate to each other in the mode of production. All right? COVID is a perfect example, absolutely, right? Just the access that some people have had to things to save them with healthcare has been different depending on the races, right? So we very much have to say that the base is not just capitalism. It is a racist, imperialist capitalism, all right? Where we have things that are not just based on class, all right? So what Stalin himself is saying, what Lenin, Marx, all of them people are saying, not just Fanon, not just Huey Newton, right? What everybody, and not just Mao, obviously, what they're all saying is that the way that people relate to each other, not just on a friendly basis, but rather the way that society is organized that influences the means of production, the way that things are made, matters. If it is racist, it is part of the base, right? It is still part of the base, even though it seems arbitrary, even though one person may not consider themselves racist, right? If the owners, if the people who drive and control the means of production are in fact using race as part of it, then that means it is part of it, right? Similarly, if religion is part of it, that means it's part of it. So the culture at the top is not just the culture, if it actually has an effect on the way that the base is fundamentally organized, right? in the way that people relate to each other. So I just want y'all to clap back. Whenever you see class reductionists on Twitter or wherever you go in life, I want y'all to clap back against them because they do not understand base superstructure at all, right? They think of factories, they don't think of human beings. And because they don't think of the human beings working in the factories and in the landfills and in the farms, right? Because they don't think of those things, because they think of a humanless world, right? They don't understand shit. And as a result of not understanding shit, they cannot speak to the masses in a language that they understand. Class reductionism is definitely cringe, I agree. Fun, because I want to say one other thing. Marx talks about this too, that fundamentally, every worker understands in their heart, without being told anything, what the fundamental contradictions of a time are, right? We understand in our hearts what's really going on. But because we have so much propaganda and because there are so many opportunists who are trying to tell us that what we see is not necessarily correct, right? Then we get a little confused. But fundamentally, people can see the truth, right? So when your explanation of the way the world is fundamentally contradicts what people have experienced, well, then they ain't gonna listen, right? And that's called structural determinism. But more importantly, when you're talking to marginalized people, if you tell them that class is all that matters and don't worry about racism when they have been affected by racism their entire life, and understand racism has affected their home ownership, racism has affected their ability to work, it's affected their ability to vote, it's affected their ability to save money, right? When they see racism touching all those aspects of life and you say that class is the only thing that's important, they know you're bullshitting. They know you don't understand the way that the world is actually set up, and so they dismiss you out of hand. They fucking dismiss you, right? So don't be that kind of communist. Talk to people about the things that they are experiencing for real, or don't talk to them at all. From forms of development of productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters. Then begins an epoch of social revolution. With the change of the economic foundation, the entire immense superstructure is more or less rapidly transformed. In considering, oh God, boy. Thank my capitalist overlords who allow me to stream. Yeah. Boy, I love them. I keep getting sidetracked from this shit, but I sure do love them motherfuckers who say things like, in America, you can talk back against your government. In America, you can, you're so glad that you have the right to speak out when in other countries you don't have the right to speak out. In Club Penguin. You hate capitalism, yes, you participate. I'm very smart. Yeah, exactly. Scrambled eggs, exactly. And Cell Annihilator. It's silliness. The shit is just plain silliness, right? Yeah, they. Well, you know how it is. Y'all know how it is. It's like it ain't even worth really talking back to it. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah. Long story short is that we get by in society. We do what we can. We spread the word as best we can. But you won't meet too many Marxist-Leninists on Twitter with 100,000 or 1 million followers, right? Everybody on Twitter with 1 million followers is liberal or conservative, right? But they sure ain't no Marxist-Leninists. So quiet, Exquisitor Vorbis. Y'all gonna tell on me. Tyranno, there's a lot of different accents out there. You might be from, who knows what type, who knows where we're all from, right? So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, you will get shut down eventually. I will get shut down eventually. My channel will be deleted eventually. My Twitter will be banned eventually. All right. So the long story short there is that we only have freedom of speech while we're small, while we don't really matter. And we have to use that, right? we have to have not just me talking to 40 people right now. We have to have a bunch of people like me talking to, small groups of people all across the world, across the country, right? So it's very important to have this distributed network, this group of cadres, right, of people educating each other, because yeah, straight up, we don't have massive platforms. There is no Marxist-Leninist with a massive platform on Twitter. All right. There are a few people who are like foreign Marxist-Leninists who have a bigger platform. There are some people who have institutions that lean Marxist-Leninist that have a big platform. But if you get big enough, eventually you get shut down. Straight up. Your Twitter got shut down in Cell Annihilator? Oh shit. When did that happen? Did I already know that? I hope not. Anyway, the more you're looking into communism, the more you're finding censorship, as in the US government censoring it, or like trying to find information on Google and not finding nothing. Yeah, you better believe it. When you try to find, let me tell you something, when you try to find things on like the way that Russia was really organized, true history, you will notice once you're looking out for propaganda, you will notice a ton of stuff. You will notice a bunch of anti-communist propaganda just when you're trying to find historical facts, straight up. Agreed, Bilbo. Agreed. Oh shit, really? Whoops. So, anyway, I'm gonna finish this paragraph because I'm almost done with this goddamn book. I don't know, kitchen sink defense. If anybody else in the chat knows, that'd be very interesting. I know that. I mean, I'm vegan, and I know a lot of us other communists are vegan as well. But just as our opinion of an individual is not based on what he thinks of himself, so we cannot judge of such a period of transformation by its own consciousness. On the contrary, this consciousness must be explained rather from the contradictions of material life, from the existing conflict between the social productive forces and the relations of production. No social order ever perishes before all productive forces for which there is room in it have been developed, and new higher relations of production never appear before the material conditions of their existence have matured in the womb of the old society itself. Therefore, mankind always sets itself only such tasks as it can solve, since looking at the matter more closely, it will always be found that the task itself arises only when the material conditions for its solution already exist or are at least worked in the process of formation. Such is Marxist materialism applied to social life, to the history of society. Such are the principal features of dialectical and historical materialism. All right, we finished the book. Yay! All right. Yeehaw, we finished. Woo, yeah. Well, thank y'all for listening to me read Dialectical and Historical Materialism. I think there's a ton of good stuff in there. And if anything, if y'all could take away anything from this stream, I'm gonna take up against your best efforts. That's right, Exquisitor Warvis. If y'all could take away anything from this stream, what I would like you to take away is the idea that you can't look at ideas, right? You can't look at great men. You can't look at what history books try to tell you history is about. When you talk about an issue, you cannot just talk about the single issue alone in a vacuum. You have to look at what's changing. You have to look at the way things relate to each other. You have to look at the contradictions. What two things are fighting? What is growing and what is dying away, right? This way of looking at the world is dialectical materialism, right? And it is a new way of thinking for most of us. It takes practice. So what I want you to do is start looking for the contradictions, right? When you notice that something is off, when you look at the world and you see shit going on and there's something wrong, right? When you keep seeing the same problem happening again and again, ask yourself what the two sides of the contradiction are. Pay attention to the money. Pay attention to who owns what's going on, who benefits, right? And then figure out if there is a contradiction, what is keeping the contradiction from solving itself, right? If something keeps happening again and again and it's the same problem, what outside force is keeping those two things from solving the problem and destroying each other, right? So when you look at, like, for example, police brutality, when you look at things like the coronavirus response, right? Don't look at things like libs versus libs versus Republicans, right? That's not the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. Anything performative, anything that's obvious and that has nothing to do with money, that ain't what we're looking at. We're following the money trail. We're looking at the way things are produced. We're looking at who benefits, what rich person in particular benefits, right? And I want y'all to think about things in terms of what is growing, as in what is the most recent thing, not what is historically happening again and again and again, but rather what is just now coming into being, right? Because that is probably the dominant force or the thing to focus on for solving the problem, right? Yeah, when in doubt, always follow the money. That is dialectical materialism. Absolutely. So yeah, that's dialectical historical materialism in a nutshell. I personally feel like the first half of this book is a lot better in a lot of ways. Just because of as far as giving the idea of dialectical and historical materialism, but the latter half of the book explains a lot of Marxist theory in a couple of pages, right? So a lot of the stuff that I've gone over in long form on this channel is stuff that they kind of briefly go over, very quickly go over in the latter half of the book. So it's always good to have a refresher. But those first few pages, if y'all do reread this book or decide to read this book, which just by reading aloud and getting distracted, I still finished in under 4 hours, right? Reading aloud. Imagine how much faster you could just read it by yourself, and just reread that first half of the book, chapter 1 and 2. All right, because chapter 1 and 2 really go over what dialectical and historical materialism is, and it's a way of thinking that you have to practice in order to really understand. So. All right, y'all, that's it for today. Thank you so much for coming, and I will see you all on Tuesday. And right on, She Was Kissed by Fire. That's awesome. If I don't start another stream over the weekends where I'm just reading books out loud and trying not to get so distracted. So thank you, Danger Jeff. Thank you, Tierno. I'm always glad when you come. I appreciate all y'all. Love y'all. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I will see you later. Thank you so much.